What if the biggest invitation of your life is not something you earn, but something you can still refuse? What if what you keep postponing today is actually the most important table you were ever meant to sit at? And what if the people who seem less likely are the ones who end up inside, while those who assumed they had time are left outside? In Luke 14:15-24, Jesus tells a parable at a meal, surrounded by people who are already thinking about honor, status, and spiritual identity. The atmosphere is quiet but full of assumptions. Someone sitting at the table says, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." It sounds like a statement of agreement, but Jesus responds with a story that shifts everything. A great banquet is prepared. A large feast is ready, and invitations are sent out. At first, everything seems simple. A generous host prepares a rich banquet and invites many guests. The expectation is that people will come, enjoy, and celebrate. But what happens next is unexpected. When the time comes for the banquet, those who were invited begin to make excuses. The first says, "I have bought a field and I must go and see it." Another says, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I am on my way to try them out." Another says, "I just got married, so I cannot come." At first glance, these may sound like normal life responsibilities. Work, possessions, relationships, things that are not bad in themselves. But in the context of the invitation, they become reasons for delay. And delay becomes refusal. The servant returns and reports this to the master of the house. And the reaction is not what anyone expects. The host becomes angry. Not because the banquet is unworthy, but because the invitation has been treated as secondary. The banquet was ready, the table was set, but the invited guests chose other priorities. Then something powerful happens. The master gives a new instruction. Go quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. This changes the entire direction of the story. The invitation is no longer limited to those originally chosen. It is expanded to those who were not expected, those who were overlooked, those who had no social advantage. The servant does as instructed, but there is still room. So the master says again, "Go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full." This is not just hospitality, it is urgency. The goal is not partial attendance. The goal is fullness. And then comes the final statement, "Not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet." This ending is heavy, not because the banquet is cancelled, but because opportunity is replaced. The invitation remains generous, but the original refusal has consequences. To understand this parable, it is important to see what is happening beneath the surface. The banquet represents something greater than a meal. It represents the kingdom of God. The invitation represents opportunity to enter into that kingdom. And the responses of the invited guests reveal something about human priorities. Each excuse in the story is connected to something real. A field represents responsibility and investment. Oxen represent work and productivity. Marriage represents relationship and personal life. None of these are inherently wrong, but in the moment of invitation, they become competing priorities. The deeper issue is not activity itself, but timing and value. The invited guests do not say they will never come. They simply imply that now is not the time. And that is where the tension lies. Because opportunity delayed becomes opportunity missed. The parable is not about condemning daily life. It is about revealing how easily important things can overshadow the most important thing. The banquet was not a casual gathering. It was a prepared feast. It was ready. It had been planned. It was waiting. But readiness does not guarantee participation. There is also something significant about the role of the servant in the story. The servant represents the messenger, the one who delivers the invitation, the one who reports back, the one who goes out again when rejection happens. The servant does not change the message, he simply carries it further. When the original guests refuse, the invitation expands. This reveals a key principle in the story. Rejection does not cancel the purpose of the banquet, it redirects it. Those who were first invited refuse, so others are brought in. Those who were expected delay, so those who were not expected are welcomed. This reversal is not random. It reflects a pattern where opportunity is not limited by assumption. The poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame are not chosen because they are more deserving. They are chosen because they respond. There is no mention of excuses from them, only acceptance. This contrast is important. The first group is defined by hesitation. The second group is defined by response, and response becomes the key difference. The banquet is not empty, it is filled, but not by those who assumed they would be there. It is filled by those who simply came when invited. This changes the way honor and expectation are understood. Being invited is not the same as entering. Being near the message is not the same as responding to it. Being aware of opportunity is not the same as accepting it. There is also a deeper emotional layer in the story. The master's anger is not random frustration. It is the response of someone who has prepared something meaningful and sees it undervalued. The banquet represents generosity, preparation, and intention. The refusal represents distraction, delay, and misplaced priority. And between those two realities lies a gap that is filled by decision. One of the most striking parts of this parable is how ordinary the excuses sound. They are not immoral. They are not rebellious in an obvious sense. They are simply life-related. But that is what makes them powerful. Because it shows that spiritual neglect does not always come from opposition. Sometimes it comes from distraction. Sometimes it comes from busyness. Sometimes it comes from assuming there will always be another opportunity. The story does not say the guests were evil. It says they declined. And decline, repeated and justified, becomes exclusion from the feast. The expansion of the invitation to the streets and roads reveals something even more profound. The kingdom of God is not limited to those who assume entitlement. It is open to those who respond. This introduces a shift in perspective. Value is no longer based on status or expectation. It is based on willingness. The banquet is filled with people who were not initially considered. This reveals that inclusion in the kingdom is not about social position, but about reception of invitation. The final line of the parable carries weight because it closes the opportunity for those who refused, not because the banquet is insufficient, but because their response was absent when it mattered. This is where urgency becomes part of the message. Not urgency driven by fear, but urgency driven by awareness. Opportunities are not always repeated in the same form. The banquet does not wait indefinitely for those who decline it repeatedly. And yet, the story is not primarily about exclusion. It is about invitation. A banquet prepared, a table set, a host who desires fullness. The generosity of the host is seen in how widely the invitation extends, from the invited guests to the overlooked, to those far outside normal expectation. The movement is outward, expansive, inclusive, but not passive. It requires response. This parable challenges assumptions about timing, priority, and response. It raises the question of what is considered urgent in life. Because what feels urgent in the moment may not always be what is most important. The invited guests were not idle, they were engaged in life. But engagement became distraction when faced with something greater. And that is the subtle warning within the story. Not everything urgent is ultimate, and not everything important feels urgent at first. The banquet represents something ultimate. And the refusal to attend represents misalignment of priority. In the end, the house is filled, but the outcome is shaped by response, not assumption, not proximity, not expectation, but response. The parable of the great banquet is not only about who is invited, it is about who comes and who does not, and that distinction defines the outcome of the story. The invitation remains generous, the table remains prepared, but participation depends on the decision made when the invitation arrives. And that decision cannot always be delayed without consequence, because the banquet, once begun, moves forward, and those who enter become part of what has already started. The question left by the parable is simple, but deeply personal. When the invitation is given, what takes priority? Because the table is set, and the invitation is real, but the response determines everything. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to like, follow this channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder about the importance of responding to what truly matters. Your support helps bring these reflections to more people who may be standing at their own moment of invitation without realizing its significance.